Okay, so based on this particular criteria, that what is the size of the generator and accordingly what is the type of the assembly needed. Based on that, we have classified the generators into 4 categories, and these are basically based on the size of the generator. Here it is given in megawatt rating because I mean this reference has put it like that. But please understand that generators will invariably they will be always rated in MVA, megavolt ampere, in terms of the apparent power rating. So first category is factory assembled generators that are shipped to the site completely assembled. So typically small size generators which are completely assembled in the factory and just shipped to the site as one unit, as one final product. So this category 1 generators are usually less than 6 MVA, but the classification also depends on the RPM selected, unit speed or weight, and the method of transportation to the site. So I mean those are secondary factors. Primarily it's the size. So typically generators up to or less than 6 MVA, they are completely manufactured and assembled in the factory and shipped as one unit for installation at the site. Then comes the second category. These are factory assembled generators that are shipped to the field as 2 integral component parts, rotor and stator, or 3 component parts, the rotor and 2 stator halves. These are usually between 6 to 20 MVA. So this second category, as you can understand, either 2 or most common is 3 parts. So it will be assembled in the factory in 3 different parts. One is the entire rotor complete. Second is second and third are the 2 halves of the stator. So because as we understand, stator is like a cylindrical encasing like this. So that might be difficult to transport it entirely. So usually the practice is that 2 halves of the stator, one half of the stator assembled together, another half of the stator assembled as a separate piece. So these 2 halves of the stator as 2 units, and one is the rotor. So these 3 units, they are shipped. So primarily the assembly has been done in the factory itself. Only the thing is that the 2 stator halves are to be put together and the rotor is to be inserted inside that stator encasing. And this category of generators, usually the generators having rating between 6 MVA to 20 MVA, they are manufactured and assembled in this fashion. Then comes the category 3. Category 3 are generators that require field assembly of the stator but can have the rotor shipped to the site as an integral component part. So in category 3, the rotor is coming as one integral unit, but the stator is not assembled at all. The stator is just, the stator core and the winding and everything that is shipped to the on-site location, and there it is assembled. These category 3 generators are usually between 20 and 50 MVA. So as the size is growing, because it will be becoming difficult to handle, so we are assembling at the site. And finally is category 4. These generators are those which require complete assembly of the stator and rotor at the site, and these are usually greater than 50 MVA. So these are the largest category, greater than 50 MVA generators, and for these generators, it won't be possible to assemble any piece before, and usually they are transported. Everything is transported on site, and stator and rotor are assembled at the site. So as you can understand here, as you are going from category 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, the number of factory tests will reduce and the number of field tests will increase. So larger is the share of work which is being done on field, the more will be the share of tests which need to be conducted on field. That is the underlying principle. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
No.
Okay. Let's move ahead. And there are some specifications for testing which we will just have a brief look at. So as it says here, a very complete and strongly phased factory and field test program must be included in the specifications. So that's very, as we can understand, that's very integral to any particular engineering equipment, is that, the level of testing which is needed, what is the conditions under which the test should be conducted, and what are the outcomes expected from the test. Those should be very clearly defined. So this is a very important thing for the practical application point of view. The tests should be explicitly listed with the identification of specific test values where necessary. So that is important, that exactly which tests need to be conducted, which will be conducted in the factory, which will be conducted on the field, and what are the values, which parameters you are measuring in those tests, and what are the expected values of those parameters. And then some operational aspects. It says here that all factory and field tests should be witnessed by the engineer or the owner, and a manufacturer's test certificate furnished. So these are the operational details. For small generating units less than 6 MVA, where a factory witness or inspection is not cost effective, the engineer or owner should thoroughly review the factory test certificates once they are received from the manufacturer. So as I said, for the smaller units up to 6 MVA, which are completely assembled in the factory and just shipped as one final unit, one product to the site, for them, obviously, all the tests will be conducted, almost all the tests will be conducted in the factory only. So for these category of generators, the owner of the power plant or the engineer in charge of the power plant, it won't be maybe not cost effective for them to visit wherever the manufacturer might be, very distant, it might be imported one, or I mean, even in India, it can be having a long distance where this generator is there being manufactured. And also, I mean, because we are purchasing it as a product, so it might not be operationally possible to have witnessed the tests firsthand. So that way, only the factory test certificates needs to be reviewed. So those test certificates which are given by the manufacturer, those need to be thoroughly studied and reviewed by the engineer who is responsible for the installation on site. Then there are some standards. Usually, two standard bodies give the standards for these generators. As it says here, specific test values should be assigned to each test specified as per the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, one very famous international body which governs the specifications and regulations at the global level for different electrical systems. And another is the American National Standards Institute, more popular in US, but yeah, it's also recognized globally as well. So ANSI. So either IEEE or ANSI, each one is having their own codes for what are the test requirements for these generators. So these test values of each test, those should be as per one of these standards. Some deviation, I mean, in special cases, like as it says here, if the generator terminal voltage rating is different from that which is covered in these standards, if the voltage rating itself is different, then obviously the test values for the parameters will also be different. So in those special cases, which is not really that common, because usually the standards will actually cover all the possible combinations of generator voltage and power ratings. So usually this will be covered, but if let's say there is some combination of generator voltage and power rating which is not covered in one of these standards, then specific values can be calculated, and then the test values should be judged or assessed with respect to those specific values. So if the test value is predetermined, a specific test value should only be listed when it is different from what is required by the IEEE or ANSI standards. So those are the standard values which are already there, and only in special cases where due to special ratings of the equipment, then a separate value might be specified. Otherwise, this is what I mean. So this figure which you see here, this is a figure of 6 MVA, less than 6 MVA, 2 MVA factory assembled generator, which belongs to category 1. So as you can see, this is coming as entirely as one unit and being installed at the location. So this is the first category type generator where the entire unit is coming assembled from the factory as one. So regarding the test procedures, so specifications we saw, those need to be as per the IEEE or ANSI standards. Then there are different test procedures, different methods which have been given. Again, there are, if we go by IEEE, so IEEE has got different standards, different codes for different types of equipments and systems. So this IEEE standard 115, those, I mean, just quoted here as an example. So that deals mainly with the generators and also IEEE standard 115 paragraph 3.2 identifies 3 different test methods for the dielectric testing of generators, just quoted as one example. There are different other things also. So like it's just quoted as example. So for dielectric testing, there are three methods which are enlisted by IEEE standard 115. The AC high potential test, DC high potential test, and very low frequency test. So that way, for different components, different equipments, there are some different tests which have been identified, these standard bodies. So those either all or few or an appropriate combination of those tests need to be conducted. Then it further says if the engineer or client has a specific preferred test method, this should be stipulated in the specification. Otherwise, the manufacturer's normal test procedure will most likely be the method used. So and like there is a lot of variety, lot of because there are several tests which are listed by the standard bodies. So all tests might not be needed in every case, and many times some particular things can be left out depending upon. So this is basically, as it says here, it has to be an understanding between the manufacturer and the plant owner, or the one which is the body which is installing and managing the installation of the equipment. So that needs to be mutually agreed upon. So usually the contract document for the which will have the details of the equipment, that will also have the specifications of the tests needed. So if the normal test procedure of the manufacturer is good enough, that is okay. If some special tests are required by the client or the project owner, then those things need to be specified in the contract document. Here, an important thing to be mentioned is that for factory and field tests is that the test values recorded should be very similar regardless of the location. So let's say if some particular test is being conducted or for the same parameter, for the given parameter, there is some test which is conducted in factory and something on field. So as we can understand, it's very important that the test value should be very similar. So just one example is given here, like the insulation resistance test values for the stator windings. That's a very critical thing, because as we looked at, we have been discussing that the winding insulation is a very critical component, and this insulation winding is what determines that how much will be the temperature rise which the machine can tolerate, and ultimately that puts a limiting value on the power rating of the machine. So this is a very critical component. So now this insulation resistance test values for the stator winding, these, let's say if they are tested in the factory and then again in the field, so those should be similar. So the test conducted at the site, the value should be comparable to the insulation resistance test value recorded on the factory test certificates. Very well understood. So if the test values are not comparable, this indicates that some problem occurred during the field installation, either documented or not documented, and closer investigation is warranted. So those, especially these critical parameters, it should be ensured that the values are as per the standards and as per the factory test certificates which have been issued. The purpose of the two tests, I mean, this is also okay, I understood, but yeah, we'll discuss it slightly. So purpose of the factory test is to ensure that the machine was manufactured properly, that's obvious, and was shipped from the factory in the mint condition. The main purpose of the field test is to verify the factory test values after installation of the generator at the site. The field tests ensure that the components of the generator were not damaged in any way during shipping and installation. So that way, the same test can be conducted at both the ends as well. The factory test will ensure that from the manufacturing till the point it was shipped from factory, the thing was okay. And then at the field end, the test will ensure that there was no damage during the shipping and installation, and the equipment is still okay for functioning. Generator manufacturers routinely perform numerous factory tests on the various component parts as part of their quality control procedures. So usually, because this quality control is again a very standard term, and these days you see different manufacturers and different manufacturing industry basically talks about Six Sigma type of control measures. So they want to ensure very high precision in terms of the equipment which they are manufacturing. There should not be malfunctioning. So usually they will have some routine quality control tests which the manufacturer will be conducting at their own end. Some examples are given here. These tests include corona discharge tests on random stator coils to ensure no voids are present in the insulation, and rotor pole voltage drop tests to verify that none of the field windings are short-circuited. So just two examples given here. One is the corona discharge test on stator coils, So, determining what is the breakdown value or when the discharge occurs, up to what voltage level the stator coils can tolerate. And similarly, for the rotor pole, there'll be some voltage drop in the field windings, which should be within the permissible limits, should not be more than the acceptable range. So those needs to be ensured. So those type of tests are routinely conducted by the manufacturers. And but the tests and procedures vary with the individual manufacturer. So there is a lot of variety there. But the crux of the matter is that this should be ensured. The specifications should be ensured. So when the contract document is prepared for procuring the equipment, so that document should, along with the specification of the equipment, it should clearly specify what are the factory tests needed and what are the field tests expected and what is the expected values of those parameters. Those specifications need to be, made clear by the client or the project owner that is important, and accordingly, the tests can be conducted and proper quality can be ensured. So this is something regarding the test procedure and the operational part of testing. Any questions so far or any inputs you would like to make?
Sir, this is Harshvardhan.
Yes, sir.
Sir, all the tests that we've gone through till yet are only done only for the checking the quality of the generator, whether it is damaged or not, or it is working properly. Or
Right.
okay, sir. Okay.
Or what? Go ahead. Complete your
Or
sentence.
or otherwise, sir, the tests are also being done for the operating capacity or the some error in the reading or something like that.
Yeah, so we will look at, actually this was just few examples we shared. So there is a long list of tests which are conducted. So both ways, one is for determining the values of the critical parameters and another is to ensure that there is no error, or no some manufacturing defect during or transportation damage. So both the things are there. So now we'll go to that section where we'll discuss the tests in detail, what are exactly the tests.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's move ahead. So we will look at some of these tests in somewhat more detail. So let's first look at the electrical tests. So one of these tests which is commonly used is the resistance test of armature and field winding. So as we understand, this is a very critical component. Can anyone say why is it very critical, the resistance test of armature and field windings? Why is it important to test?
Sir, because if resistance is high, it will produce more heat and the windings may fail.
Very correct. So it's a very, very critical test, that as we have been discussing, the resistance, armature resistance will cause that I square RA loss in the armature winding, which will result in heating of the stator winding. And similarly, the other field winding also will have I square RF, due to the field resistance, it will have that type of power loss in the field winding. So that will cause the heating of the field winding. And so both these, as you have discussed, both these quantities, the heating which is resulting in the armature winding as well as in the field winding, these are actually practically the constraints on the limit up to which the generator can operate and the power it can produce. So these are the very critical inputs, very critical values which needs to be monitored. And that's why this is given here as the first one. So this test measures the stator coil winding and field winding copper resistance. So, there is nothing very, crucial in terms of the testing procedure. It is just a test for determining what is the resistance of both these windings. And how it is done is that the test normally uses a low voltage DC source and the voltmeter ammeter method to determine the resistances. So if you just connect a DC source across the windings and you measure how much is the voltage drop across the windings and how much is the current flowing, so then you can find out what is the resistance. So the resistance values in conjunction with the no load saturation and short circuit saturation tests are necessary to obtain the calculated efficiencies of the generator. So that is another application of this test, that if you combine this with the no load saturation and short circuit saturation tests, which we will come to later. So those two things, they identify actually the your other parameter which will be needed for efficiency calculation. And what is that other parameter? Can someone say? Along with this resistance. If I want to estimate the efficiency of the generator, and let's say I've got the armature resistance, then which other parameter would be needed?
Current. Armature current.
Current will depend on what thing? Armature current will depend on which particular values?
So V5 and excess.
Right. So the voltage which is being generated, but then there will be these two, as we discussed, the impedance has got two components, RA and XS, synchronous reactance. So that particular thing is determined by these no load saturation and short circuit saturation tests, the other component. And overall, this can be coupled with this resistance test, and the efficiency of the generator can be calculated. Then second one is the dielectric test of armature and field winding. So as it says here, the dielectric test can utilize either AC or DC voltages and is commonly called the high potential test, or high pot in colloquial language. So the AC test stresses the insulation at a value greater than 2 times rated voltage to ensure that the insulation is capable of enduring temporary over voltages. So as we can understand, and you probably can appreciate, that this dielectric test is basically for the insulation. So you want to ensure that what is the over voltage capacity of the insulation, and how the test is conducted is that it is the insulation is stressed with an AC voltage which is 2 times the rated voltage, 100% over voltage. So and then it is ensured, so it should probably, typically it is expected that your insulation should be able to sustain that type of, almost 100% over voltage, it should be able to sustain. And also it can be conducted with DC voltage. Direct voltage testing may also be used, but in that case, the direct voltage which will be needed will be 1.7 times the RMS value of the AC test voltage. So either way, it can be conducted. The high potential test of the stator windings is performed phase by phase. So for each phase, it is conducted one at a time. And when one phase is being tested, the two phases not being tested are jumpered together and connected to the ground. So that way, this is the testing procedure. This test is usually preceded by a visual inspection and the insulation resistance test, as it is the most severe test of the insulation. So actually, this is the most severe one, the dielectric test for insulation, for checking the intactness of the insulation. So before actually, just let me complete the sentence. So before we actually go for the dielectric test, what we do is that before that we do the visual inspection and another test which is known as the insulation resistance test. So I'll come to that after that. Yeah. Yes.
Sir, jumpered together, matlab sir?
Electrically connected together and put to the ground. So they are shorted together, you can say, and put to the ground resistance. Ground potential.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So that they do not interfere, because there is some phase relationship between the three windings. So if you are, having this particular, if you are charging this winding, so there might be some other voltage windings that we don't want to have.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is the dielectric test, but as it says here, before this dielectric, because it's a very severe test, as you can understand, we are stressing the winding to double of the rated voltage. So it's a very very high intensity test. So before that, what we do is that first of all is the visual inspection of the winding of the insulation, that there is no visually there is no defect in the insulation, and we do the insulation resistance test as the preliminary test. So let's look at that first. this is a simple one, insulation resistance test. It is similar to the winding, the armature and field winding resistances, but there is a very important difference. I will just come to that. So this insulation resistance test is commonly called the Megger or mega ohmmeter test, and this measures the DC leakage current of the insulation by stressing the insulation with an applied voltage from 100 to 15,000 volts typically. So up to 15 kV of DC voltage is applied across the insulation, and how much is the leakage current that is measured. So, what should be the ideal value? How much current is expected to flow from the insulation, through the insulation?
Around, sir, micro to milliampere.
Right. So, So ideally it should be zero. If it's an ideal insulator, then it will be zero. Any current to flow through. But as we know that there is nothing which is an ideal insulator, everything will have some particular limit up to which it can perform the insulation function. So usually when you put this type of a voltage across the insulation of the winding, there will be some, either in milliamperes or microamperes, some particular current will be flowing through this. So from this current reading, and depending upon how much voltage you applied, same V by I. So this will give you the resistance of the insulation. And this resistance usually will be in mega ohm range, and that type of thing can be determined. So that mega ohm resistance of the insulation can be determined. A high resistance value implies that insulation leakage current is minimal and that the circuit may be safely energized. So typically a very high value in several hundred mega ohms maybe is expected for the insulation. And the higher the value, the better is the insulator. That means it can resist the flow of leakage current through it in a better way. Then it says here, this test is usually performed prior to the dielectric test, because insulation failure during the insulation resistance test will not cause any significant damage due to the low values of the voltage applied. So that you can understand, because this is still a low intensity test. The voltage applied is in this range from 100 volts. So gradually you go on increasing. So 100 volt, 500 volt, 1000 volt, like that maybe. And maximum you go is up to 15 kV. Whereas usually, as we understand, the generators, they will the per phase voltage will usually be either or the terminal voltage typically will be around 11 kV or 22 kV. So accordingly, the per phase can be there. So still it's in the manageable range. And depending upon that, what is the terminal voltage and the phase voltage. This it's not always necessary to go up to 15 kV. Let's say if your generator terminal voltage is 11 kV, so the phase voltage will be how much? And let's say it's okay. Let's, for simplicity, let's assume that it's a delta connected winding. So your terminal voltage is same as the phase voltage, and you have V phi as 11 kV. So in that case, maybe we can go up to 11 kV or so, or maybe slightly higher, 10-20% higher. So that type of loading might be ensured in the insulation resistance test. And but then, so once your winding, it passes the insulation resistance test, and you have calculated the resistance, and there is no leakage, significant leakage current here in this particular range, then we go for the dielectric test. So which is like an extreme test. So for that same winding now, when we can conduct the dielectric test, having a phase voltage of 11 kV, now we will be loading it with 22 kV of AC voltage. So the dielectric test will always come later. And let's say if there is some particular failure during the insulation resistance test itself, then there is no need to go to dielectric test. If it's failing, if the resistance, if the insulation is failing within the given voltage range of insulation resistance test itself, then obviously it means that there is some malfunctioning and dielectric test need not be conducted. Rather, the winding or insulation needs to be, it should be again revisited, and manufacturing thing should be taken care of. The problem should be handled at the manufacturer side. There is one particular way in which we also express the result of this. So there are two outcomes of this insulation resistance test. One is the how much is the resistance of the insulator in terms of the actual value in mega ohms. That is one output. Another output which we also usually put is the polarization index. Now, how we define the polarization index is that it is the ratio of the insulation resistance value obtained after 10 minutes of testing to the value obtained after 1 minute of testing. So how much is the resistance if you apply the voltage, that particular voltage of insulation resistance test for 10 minutes, then how much is the resistance you observe to the value obtained after 1 minute of testing. And typically what it is expected from the insulator is that the resistance should increase with time, because if sustained over voltage is there, so there will be a larger tendency to push through the leakage current. So that is what is expected, that it should have a higher value of resistance after the 10 minutes after being stressed. So this PI value or polarization index value of 2 or greater is usually sought. So what is expected is that if for 1 minute of stressing the insulation, whatever is the resistance you get, after 10 minutes the resistance should actually double or be higher. So that is another output from this insulation resistance test. One is the mega ohms of the insulator, how much is the resistance in mega ohms, and second is the polarization index number, and which is usually expected to be 2 or more.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir,
Who is that?
why, Sir Pranay?
Yes, Pranay.
Sir, why is the resistance increasing? I didn't understand.
Yeah, so it is designed that way that the insulation actually, in a normal circumstances, as we understand, for any particular thing, the resistance is typically expected to be same. But these insulators, because this is the most critical aspect actually for a generator, how the insulation should not fail even if there is an over voltage. So there is an interesting, that is something special done with the insulator there so that the response of the resistance, the voltage and current profile is such that with time the resistance is actually increasing. So that might be interesting to look at. So this particular reference which is there, that is not given. So how it is done, the how of it we might explore. So I would like to, maybe you can look at it and see how it is done, and next class we can discuss. Right now we just have the information that is how, that is what the result is, but the how of it we don't have it right now.
Okay.
So yeah, but the how of it might be interesting to look at. So Pranit, why not you just look it up, and others also, you can just look it up and see what might be the undergoing thing, how they are ensuring that resistance is increasing with time. So we can discuss that in the next class. Yeah. And so this polarization index, yeah.
Sir, your 10 minutes is the standard time, sir, for comparison.
So that's how they have defined the polarization index. Ratio of insulation resistance value obtained after 10 minutes to the value obtained after 1 minute of testing. So that's how the standard has been defined for polarization index.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think we should discuss that next class, how it is happening. So this is there. And by the way, so what do you understand? What is the difference between resistance test of armature and field winding and the insulation resistance test? Any idea? Because both of these are measuring the resistance. The first one and the third one. Can someone say?
Sir,
Sir, in the third one, we're calculating the insulation resistance.
And what the first one, what you're doing? Yeah, totally go ahead.
Sir, in the first one we want the resistance to be low, but in the third one we want the resistance to be high.
And what is the resistance which you are measuring in the first one?
In the first one, we're measuring the resistance of field in armature windings, but in the third one, we are measuring the resistance of insulation that around the windings.
Right. So in the first one, you are measuring the resistance of the conductor, the conductor which is there in the winding. So obviously, the conductor resistance should ideally, what is the ideal value of resistance for a conductor? Perfect conductor. If it's perfectly conducting, the value will be very close to 0. Right?
Yes,
so typically it will be very low. So the armature resistance values, as we have been, if you look at the problems also which we solved, it's very low, 0.4 ohm or 0.04 ohm, like that. So it's a very low value usually. So this is the first test is basically for determining the resistance of the conductor in these two windings, armature and field windings. Whereas this third one is measuring the resistance of the insulation around those windings. And as we understand, insulation should have a very high resistance in several mega ohms. So So yeah, that is the difference between the two resistance tests. Okay, let's go ahead. Then another test is known as the stator core loop test. There is another name for this. It is also known as the ring test or the magnetizing test. And this test is performed on the stator core before insertion of the stator windings to ensure there are no defects in the stator core steel or assembly of the steel, and to verify the manufacturer's calculated values. So as we understand, and if you recall the video which we had, which we saw in a few classes back, that video also, if you recall, this if the stator, if it is assembled, first you assemble the stator core and then you insert the windings in that core. So this test is done when the stator core has been assembled, but the windings have not been inserted still. So before inserting the stator windings, we want to test the stator core, that it is, has been assembled properly or not. So this test, as it says, it is meant to ensure that there are no defects in the stator core steel or assembly of the steel. If defects in this stator core were not detected until after assembly of the generator, correction could be extremely expensive. So, I mean, that is quite understood also, that if you don't assemble the stator core and there is some problem with the core, but you didn't detect the problem then, and rather you went ahead and assembled the windings and put the rotor and everything, and the generator assembly is complete. And now after that, if you detect that there is some problem with the stator core, there is a lot of heating which is occurring, there is high eddy current loss and hysteresis loss, that type of things. So then it will be very expensive. You'll have to open up the entire generator again and remove the winding and do the correction and all. So that would be very expensive. So there are two ways this test is conducted. One is the stator core loop test, which we will look just now, and after that there is another technique which has been lately developed, which is known as the electromagnetic core imperfection detector test, the ELCID test. So that is becoming more popular rather than the stator core loop test, but we will look at both, because traditionally what was used was the stator core loop test. And this ELCID is becoming more popular. Here, when it says in the last decade, this reference is quite old. So this ELCID was developed in late 80s or 90s. That's when this was developed. But before that, stator core loop test was the standard. So we will look at the stator core loop test first. So this is the procedure. The traditional stator core loop test consists of wrapping a number of turns of heavy cable toroidally around the stator core and frame. So what you do is that around the stator core, you do a toroid type of winding. I hope you understand that toroid is like, you just wound it around that core. So because just I'll just share the screen. So this toroid thing, I hope you can recall from your early in physics and all, people must have studied this in class 12 or so. So this toroid is something like a donut type of thing. So this type of I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, the top view. So something of that sort. So now what we do is that we wind the this particular coil around this in a helical manner like that. So here in this case, this toroid which we are talking about, the inner thing, the core on which you are winding, this is nothing but the stator core, and on top of that stator core you are winding some turns of a particular coil for doing this test like that. So we wind it around that entire thing. So by wrapping, so this is what it says, consists of wrapping a number of turns of heavy cable toroidally around the stator core and frame. So this is the stator core and the frame, and when you're putting this heavy turns of this heavy coil around this particular thing in a toroid fashion. Then once you have wrapped that entire stator core with this particular heavy cable, what we do is that the cable is energized with a single phase line frequency current, which is increased until rated flux is obtained. So once you have done this wrapping of this heavy cable around the entire stator core, then this cable is energized at the whatever is the line frequency current, single phase. It is energized with that. The idea is that we want to have the rated flux, whatever is the flux, rated flux of the machine, that same rated flux should be established. And this flux value is maintained for a period of time, usually 30 minutes to 1 hour, at which time the core is checked for hot spots caused by excessive burns or defective interlaminar insulation on the stator core steel. So this particular flux is maintained for some particular duration, typically 1 hour, and what is there is that the core is checked for if there are some hot spots, if there is some particular heating up in some particular part of the core, typically which might occur due to the defective interlaminar insulation. So as we have discussed earlier also, if you recall that when we assemble the stator core, it is done in a laminar fashion. Different laminations, they are stacked together, and each lamination is insulated from the next lamination so as to cut down on the eddy currents which might circulate. So if there is some particular defect in this interlaminar insulation, the insulation between the two laminations, two particular laminates, then there will be a eddy current, excessive eddy current which might flow there, and that might cause a temporarily small hot spot or even burning of the core in that particular part. At the same time, measurements are taken of input voltage and power and the volts per turn induced in the stator core to obtain the stator core losses. So you also monitor how much is the voltage and voltage which it is drawing and the power loss which is occurring, so as to estimate the stator core loss. This value is compared with the manufacturer's previously calculated stator core loss as a check on the machine design. So this is what the stator core loop test is about, and so we basically determine what is the stator core loss, and we ensure that there is no hot spot or burning of, or there is no defect in the interlaminar insulation. The procedure is clear, I think.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And what will happen here, a side effect of this stator core loop test is that, as it says here, this test also physically shakes down and compacts the core steel. So that's usually observed because so far you have just assembled the stator together and it has not been subjected to any magnetic field so far. But now you're like exposing it for the first time to the whatever is the rated value of the flux. So typically what happens is that physically actually the laminates, they sort of get compacted together. So due to this compaction, what might happen is that the tightening of the bolts which was done earlier and a particular pressure was ensured, particular structural integrity which was ensured, that might loosen up. So this compaction may result in a loss of core pressure. Maintaining the design core pressure is important as this pressure maintains the mechanical rigidity of the core while allowing the rotor magnetic field to penetrate into the core steel. So this mechanical rigidity is very important, as we understand. So that might, this might loosen, because it gets compacted, so the rigidity might be lower once you do this test. So if the core loses its mechanical rigidity, vibrating core sheets could damage the stator winding insulation and also produce eddy currents within the core, creating local hotspots. So if this rigidity is not ensured, then obviously you can understand, these are just different sheets of the core which are put together and bolted together. So if it is getting compacted, so it becomes loosened up. So this might vibrate when actually you load the machine. So that might damage the stator windings also and might also cause more eddy current losses and hot spots. So therefore, it is important that once this test is conducted, the stator core loop test is conducted, the bolts for which are there for for putting the core together and for making it as one structure, This core bolts and core pressure should be checked after the stator core loop test, and if necessary, the core bolts should be retorqued to obtain the design core pressure. So that is a precaution which should always be accompanied after the stator core loop test. That after the core loop test has been done, you ensure that what is the bolts are properly tightened, the proper core pressure is maintained. If not, if needed, then you retorque, you tighten the bolts again so as to ensure that the design core pressure is maintained. The stator core loop test arrangement also requires a large external power source and considerable field time to wrap the large conductor cables around the stator frame and core. So those are some disadvantages, you can say, as we can understand, because we are loading it for the entire rated value of the flux, and the rated value of stator core losses, that much power has to be supplied. So it might need a large external power source. That is one thing. Another thing is that because it is easy to draw here as a figure, but now once you have seen the videos and all, you can appreciate that this stator core is a huge structure, depending upon the machine size, obviously. But for a good sized machine, also fairly reasonable sized machine, this stator core is a huge thing. It's a very huge structure, and then winding that heavy cable around that particular stator core, that will need a considerable amount of field time and effort to enable that thing to happen. So those are some disadvantages, you can say, and that's why this is not really very common now, very popular now. It has been replaced by this electromagnetic core imperfection detector test, ELCID. But traditionally this was being used, so that's why, for sake of completion, we needed to discuss this. So any questions so far, or anything anyone has to say?
No, sir.
Okay, so we will stop here for today's class, and the remaining tests we will continue in the next class.
Okay, sir.
Okay, and I hope everyone has submitted their assignment too, because the deadline for that was till last night only.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We've submitted. Sir, we've submitted.
Okay. Good. So those and for the other assignment, if because there was this assignment 3, for that the deadline is till Sunday night. So please make sure that you do that in time also. And Monday we will discuss this thing, that assignment, third assignment in detail. And yeah, and that's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.